Brady couldn't contain his excitement. He had recently purchased an engagement ring for his girlfriend of 6 months, Quinn, and he was eager to propose to her. He had been waiting for the perfect moment to pop the question. Brady had always been the kind of guy who wore his heart on his sleeve, unafraid to express his emotions openly. Quinn, on the other hand, seemed more reserved, rarely sharing her feelings in front of others. Despite this difference, Brady was convinced that their love was genuine. Brady convinced Quinn to join him for a weekend getaway to one of his favorite spots on Little Bear Mountain. They rented a cozy cabin where they spent the day hiking and exploring the surrounding wilderness. Quinn appeared to enjoy herself, although there was a noticeable distance in her demeanor. As night fell, Brady prepared a romantic, candlelit dinner, and they sat down to eat together, the flickering flames casting a warm glow over the table. After their dinner, Brady knelt before Quinn, his heart pounding with anticipation, and retrieved the ring box from his pocket. With trembling hands, he opened it and presented it to Quinn, his warm smile radiating excitement. However, instead of the joyful response he had hoped for, his gaze met Quinn's eyes, which were filled with a profound sadness. Sensing her hesitation, Brady lowered the ring box and waited anxiously for her reply.
I can't,
she said softly, her voice filled with sorrow.
I've been trying to think of a way to tell you.
Brady's heart began to sink as her words registered.
I know how much this means to you, you and me, and I've tried. I'm sorry, Brady. I have a lot of love for you. I really do. I'm just not in love with you.
His world spiraled around him, the colors fading to gray as the weight of her words settled in. Quinn continued to speak, trying to explain herself, but Brady's mind was consumed by a deafening roar, drowning out her words. She soon gathered her things, having called for a friend to pick her up. She stood at the door, about to walk out of his life forever. Brady's voice sounded distant as he finally spoke.
Do whatever you need to. Find happiness if you can. But know that I'll still be here. I'll be waiting.
Quinn gave him one last look, her eyes filled with regret, before silently slipping out the door. Left alone in the empty cabin, Brady found himself unable to speak, unable to move, unable even to cry. He sat there, the weight of his heartache pressing down on him, engulfed in a suffocating silence. A year passed, and Quinn found herself in the company of someone new, a man named Darren. With him, she experienced a joy and contentment she hadn't known before. She suspected Darren was planning to soon propose to her, and she couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement at the thought. Darren had arranged a weekend getaway for them, coincidentally at a cabin reminiscent of the one she had shared with Brady. Despite her happiness with Darren, thoughts of Brady lingered in the back of her mind. She hadn't seen or heard from him since that fateful night. Quinn's inquiries with mutual friends yielded no information. It was as if Brady had vanished into thin air. Although she couldn't shake her concern for him, Quinn was determined to focus on her own happiness and move forward with her life. Darren and Quinn savored every moment of their time together, relishing the peace and serenity of the natural surroundings. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the landscape, Darren took Quinn's hand and led her to a secluded spot near the cabin. With a tender smile, he dropped to one knee and presented her with a small, velvet box. Quinn's heart skipped a beat as Darren poured out his love and devotion, culminating in a heartfelt proposal. Overwhelmed with emotion, Quinn tearfully accepted, her eyes sparkling with happiness as she held Darren in a loving embrace. Late that night, something caused Quinn to awaken with a start. She was greeted by the silence and darkness of the cabin, but a faint echo lingered in her mind, the distant sound that had stirred her from her slumber. Had she heard someone scream? Rubbing the sleep from her eyes, she reached out instinctively, her fingers grasping at the empty space beside her on the bed. Panic began to creep in as she realized Darren was not there. She sat up, her heart pounding in her chest. Something felt wrong. Quinn's footsteps echoed in the empty cabin as she hurried through the dark living room, the soft fabric of her robe trailing behind her. She saw that the front door was standing open, gently swaying in the breeze, and she stopped where she was, watching, waiting.
Darren?
Her voice wavered as it pierced the silence, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the threshold for any sign of her missing fiancé. But the only response was the rustle of leaves in the night wind. With cautious steps, Quinn approached the open door, her eyes fixed on the enveloping darkness outside. The woods loomed, their gnarled branches reaching out into the night. She fumbled for the switch to the outside light, but it wasn't working.
Darren?
Her voice echoed into the darkness, pleading for a response that never came. Retreating into the cabin, Quinn's hands trembled as she reached for a flashlight, its reassuring weight offering a semblance of comfort. With determined resolve, she ventured outside, the beam of light cutting through the shadows as she searched for Darren. Still seeing and hearing no sign of him, she paused again, close to tears by this point. Just then, she heard a haunting whisper carried on the night breeze, which sounded like it was coming from around the side of the cabin.
Darren, is that you?
Her voice trembled with uncertainty, the darkness swallowing her words as they hung in the air.
Please answer me!
Desperation tinged her cry, but the only response was the wind through the trees. She slowly walked in the direction of the whispered voice, tightly gripping the flashlight. Quinn's breath caught in her throat as she rounded the corner and beheld Darren's lifeless form lying on the ground. Even in the dark, she could see that he was drenched in blood, and that the handle of a large hunting knife was standing upright, its blade having been plunged into his heart, all the way to the hilt. The sight sent a wave of terror coursing through her veins. Before she could comprehend the horror before her, a figure emerged from the shadows, sinister and foreboding. It was Brady, though he was nearly unrecognizable. His movements were fluid, almost otherworldly, as if guided by some unseen force. His eyes, once warm and inviting, now held a darkness that made her instantly shudder with fear.
Hello, Quinn.
His voice echoed, each word dripping with an unnerving calmness that chilled her to the bone. Quinn's hands trembled as she knelt and reached out to Darren's body, her heart pounding in her chest as she desperately searched for any sign of life. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered his name,
Darren.
her voice choked with grief and disbelief.
What have you done?
She cried out, her words an anguished plea for answers.
Do you know what happens when a person is wounded so gravely that they can never heal?
Brady's voice was cold and calm. Quinn struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what she was hearing as she stared at him in disbelief. Unable to find the words to respond to his cryptic message, her mind raced with fear and confusion. His voice, devoid of emotion, continued to pierce the silence.
That wound bleeds out, and they die.
He stated matter-of-factly, his words hanging heavy in the air like a dreadful omen. Quinn's heart pounded in her chest as she absorbed the gravity of his proclamation, her mind reeling with terror at the implications of his chilling revelation.
Brady, why?
She managed to choke out between sobs, her voice thick with agony. Brady took a step closer, his movements deliberate, his once familiar features distorted by an ominous intensity.
You have me confused with someone else,
he said.
Brady didn't survive. His heart was gone, you see, and that wound was too great.
Quinn sat frozen, her mind reeling with disbelief and horror, unable to process the ghastly truth of his words.
I'm not that man, Quinn. I'm what was left behind.
He leaned closer, his dark eyes staring into her soul.
And now you will know that pain as well.
With a haunting finality, he turned and walked into the shadows of the woods. As his presence melded seamlessly with the darkness, his words lingered like a foreboding whisper.
Once you've succumbed to your wounds, when you've passed on, know that I'll still be here.